The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 5th chapter. Glory to you,
O Lord.
While the people pressed upon Jesus to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had ceased speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep, and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a great shoal of fish. And as their nets were breaking, they beckoned to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. And when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he was astonished, and all that were with him at the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. Henceforth you will be catching men." And when they had brought the boats to land, they left everything and followed. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Grace, peace, and much joy to you, people of God. The theme of Epiphany is the way God reveals his divinity in the world. Today we hear of a miraculous catch of fish, a vision of the Lord in the temple, and several resurrection appearances. All these are ways that God manifests his divinity, his glory in the world. But in the gospel, before we even come to the miraculous catch of fish, divinity is being manifested in the world because the people are gathered around Jesus to hear the word of God. That powerful and effective word that does what it says. Jesus proclaims the kingdom that draws near in him, the incarnate Word of God. And so Jesus' teaching from Simon Peter's fishing boat is already a manifestation of God's divinity for those with ears to hear. But then after the teaching, when Jesus instructs Simon, "Go out into the deep and put down your nets for a catch," this will be another deeper manifestation. And at Jesus' word, Simon goes out into the deep. If we would see the manifestation of God's divinity and power and majesty in the world, we can't just keep paddling around in the shallow, surfacey, day-to-day life that we live. We have to put out into the deep. And Simon does that, and the miraculous catch of fish persuades him that he is indeed in the presence of God. But what is his reaction? Not, "This is great, let's do this again and again," but rather a sense of his own inadequacy in the presence of God. A revelation of the transcendence, the otherness, the power of God evokes in us a sense of who we are in the presence of God, which is not much. Depart from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. That's a parallel between this manifestation of the glory of God in the miraculous catch of fish and one of the more striking manifestations of the glory of God in the Old Testament. It happened in 742 BC. That's the year King Uzziah died. Isaiah is in the temple, and he sees the Lord enthroned on high in that place, and his glory fills the whole place. And as the temple is filled with the smoke of heavenly incense, and the fiery winged angels are calling to each other the glories of the thrice holy God, Isaiah, like Peter, recognizes his own inadequacy. He doesn't say, wow, this is the coolest mystical experience anybody ever had. He says, woe is me, I'm lost. Because I know who I am in the presence of God. Not much. But God responds to our recognition of who we are, the distance that exists between his holiness and that which we are. He responds, he sends one of the seraphs with a coal, a glowing coal from the heavenly altar of incense to touch Isaiah's unclean lips and to say to him, behold, this has touched your lips. Your sin is taken away, your guilt is taken away. God bridges the divide we could never bridge from his side with forgiveness. And then comes the call for Isaiah, go, be a prophet. For Peter, from now on, you will be fishing for people, casting the net of the kingdom out into the depths of people's lives, to bring them from God's side across that divide, from who we are to who God is, to being in the presence of God, to be able to worship him, and to appreciate the way he manifests his divinity and his power in our lives. But what will be the result of this mission? The reading in brackets from today's first reading is the description of what will happen with Isaiah's mission. And it's in brackets so that the preacher won't have to annoy the hearers with this difficult text. But it is not insignificant. This very text is what is quoted in the Gospels as the reason why Jesus teaches in parables. It is quoted at the end of Acts as the explanation for why St. Paul preaches his gospel to the nations. Isaiah will prophesy, and Jesus will teach in parables, and St. Paul will preach the gospel, and they will not be understood. This is classically called the blinding passage. I will blind their eyes, I will stop their ears, their minds will not be able to understand, God says. What then is the point of putting out into the deep for a catch? God's ways are not our ways. God controls events in ways that we cannot understand. One look at the depths of our own lives should explain that pretty clearly. When we encounter things that we cannot understand about our lives, our relationships, the world around us, our call is to be faithful to the grace that we have been given. To hang on to our faith that the grace of God to us has not been in vain. This week and the next 2 weeks we have readings from the great 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, in which St. Paul discusses the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is in fact the center point of the apostolic teaching. Passed on, St. Paul says very carefully, he says, I'm telling you exactly what I received. And every preacher of the gospel needs to be saying that I'm passing on to you exactly what I received, not the fruit of my own thought. You don't want that. The confession that we share in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ is the very center point of our faith. And it's not just a teaching that's passed on, it's the very power of God to save, in which you are being saved, St. Paul says. This is the effective and powerful Word of God that does what it says. And this is true even in our own lives. Whenever Jesus Christ turns a life around, heals a relationship, opens a bitter heart, teaches a greedy soul to be generous, a fearful soul to love, forgives a sinner, then the fruits of Jesus' resurrection are already happening in our lives. And so when we encounter things that we don't understand, or encounter a fellow human being who cannot understand why the hardships of this life persist, why I've skinned my knees praying and God doesn't seem to answer, it's because God controls things on a level beyond our understanding. The distance between who God is and who we are can only be traversed by God, and only in God's way. For us, we recognize that we cannot ignore the deeps in our lives. We must put out into the deep if we would encounter God. We must put out into the deep when we encounter our brothers and sisters, and not be content to leave our conversations on the level of surface platitudes, but to talk about the inscrutable and yet marvelous way that God acts in our lives. And when we come to the depths, then we see. We who are not quite the cherubim and the seraphim, but who are nevertheless gathered in this temple, we see that heaven and earth are all filled with his glory. And what is our response? It is to praise the one who sends us the powerful and effective word, gives us a glimmer of understanding, enough light for the next step forward. we do not fear to put out into the deep, we will see his glory and be moved